Hi, I'm Katie, and this is my Myths and Methods project. This assignment was fun. I really enjoyed observing and talking to the people about which of these methods they believed in. They were actually a lot more common than I thought. One of the most interesting of these myths was that we only use 10% of our brains. Many of the teenagers I talked to believed in this myth, and I think it may be partially because of the way it's portrayed in the media. There are lots of movies about people getting superpowers and stuff after they access 100% of their brain. Most of them involve someone taking like a special drug or something that allows them to do this, which doesn't make any sense if you think about it at all. Another myth I found to be particularly interesting was the one about students needing to find their learning style in order to be successful. Every single one of my teachers has told me to do this at one point or another, but I don't remember them actually trying to help me figure it out at any point, which I guess has worked out in my favor because I've never missed out on anything or felt like I couldn't learn something because it wasn't my learning style. The myth that I found most people to believe in, though, was that opposites attract. My grandparents, my parents, some teenagers, people from all different age groups really, believed in this one. It was strange though because a lot of the other myths, if you told people they weren't true, they would accept it, but this one, they were trying to defend it, which was interesting. They were more willing to accept other ones as false, such as vaccines causing autism, because it made sense after you explained it. If I were to study one of these myths on my own, I would like to study whether or not learning style has any effect on the student's success. I would like to use an experimental study because it would allow me to control all the variables and eliminate some of the intervening variables. I'd want to make sure the groups were the same in almost every aspect aside from the experimental and placebo differences. I would need to use 3 groups, a control group, an experimental group, and a placebo group. They would have a random assignment of students when selecting the groups to ensure that they have a relatively equal assortment of like different interests, different backgrounds, different things like that, so the groups are relatively equal. The control group would set a baseline for the rest of the groups to compare to. My idea for the experiment is to test students on something, and the subject doesn't really matter, it could be anything. And then we'll teach a class on it and test them again. So the control group would be set up like a lecture-style class. And the point of the experiment is to see which group will improve the most from the first test to see if the learning style has any effect on the learning. The experimental group would be taught with accommodations to each student's learning style. The placebo group would be taught just like the control group, except for they would be given a placebo treatment every day, such as like a candy bar or something, to see if that has any effect as well. All the groups need to be taught the exact same material and given the same test. If the experimental group scores higher than the baseline in improvement, then that shows a positive correlation between the learning style and success. But if the placebo group also scores higher, it's definitely not a causation between the learning style and success because there are obviously intervening variables that have caused that. Some of the intervening variables could be the amount of time that people studied, dedication to the class, events that happened outside of class, things like that. It could be like time of day, which in an experiment you could make that the same throughout. The random assignment would help to eliminate some of the intervening variables because it would spread them out throughout each group, but obviously they would still have a possibility of existing. As for generalizability, it would depend on the sample that was chosen. For example, like if you only chose kids from Utah, you could only generalize 2 kids in Utah because you wouldn't have a sample of kids from North Carolina because they're not the same. They won't have the same experiences, so you can't generalize the information to them or to the rest of the world. So it would really depend on the sample that you chose. And you need to make sure that the sample that you choose in your experiment represents the other groups appropriately. I would most likely choose a sample of college kids from probably Utah to represent Utah colleges. And as for biases, I think that the Hawthorne bias would be the biggest one that would affect this, because if people know they're participating in a study, they might work harder or act differently, which would affect the results and act as an intervening variable.